Hey everybody, Gary Edelman, American Battlefield Trust. We are back, and feel free to put that with an extended back into the comments if you'd like. You're with the American Battlefield Trust. We are on the field of Pickett's Charge about halfway across, and we're going to continue the Confederate advance toward the Union line here. You might be able to see Seminary Ridge and even the Virginia Memorial with Robert E. Lee on top behind me over there. Let's reorient you here. As we go south along Seminary Ridge off in the distance, you're seeing more of the Confederate approach. Now we're getting into a view of Pickett's division during their attack in what we call Pickett's Charge. And now you're looking across not only the field of Pickett's Charge, but terrible fighting on July 2nd, 1863, as Georgians advanced across this field. As we move closer, you might catch the Cadore farm over there that Wayne Mott's told us was a little bit smaller in terms of the barn. And now you're seeing Cemetery Ridge. The largest clump of trees over there is the clump of trees, the copse of trees. And now you're seeing the Bryan farm over there, a wartime structure rebuilt on that spot. And now you're seeing over toward the commercial district, but was still involved in the field of Pickett's Charge, to be sure. We're now looking northward. If you could see past the trees, you'd see some of the town of Gettysburg. And as we move, finally, we're coming back to Seminary Ridge, the McMillan rise over there, as well as where the North Carolina Monument would be, and now coming full circle. We're going to continue to walk toward the Union line off in the distance, and I think you're going to see from here that Cemetery Ridge is a little bit maybe more of a ridge than you would have thought. We hope you'll share this with your friends so as many people can experience this as possible. We've appreciated all your generosity along the way here. We got other people walking the field of Pickett's Charge here as we go toward the Rocky Top. Now, I'm going to ask Doug, Chris, Wayne, or Sarah, whoever wants to hop on, what would it have been like for the Confederates right about now?
So I think it would have been horrific at this point. And when we think about all the micro-terrain, if we look off to our south, we can see we have a little bit of an intervisibility line. That would have protected us from, think about McGilvery's artillery line, south of where the Pennsylvania Monument is, or that big dome monument. So we get some protection, but you can see now we have nothing in front of us, no cover and concealment. We're entirely in the open. Of course, we've been following Pettigrew's division as he does this. We mentioned that the Bliss barn was burning. The problem also for the Confederates at this point is the Union can see the extent of this. We were talking about Brockenborough's brigade is the very northernmost brigade. About the time they either get to the Bliss barn or Long Lane, facing 30+ pieces of artillery firing off of Cemetery Hill. As Gary mentioned, they were fairly well beat up before they got here. They got beat up in McPherson's Woods on day one, and now here they find themselves on July 3rd. They're going to stop. Some people would say they would retreat, but either way they don't keep going. So now it's Davis's brigade that is the very northern end, and our flank is exposed. So you can imagine for Union troops that are off to the north of us, this would be the 8th Ohio. They had been on the skirmishing lines, fighting over where we see Colt Park today, commanded by Colonel Franklin Sawyer. Because they all of a sudden now no longer have troops at their front, he would offer that they gave one volley into Brockenborough's brigade and then they left. They will start to wheel in our direction, and now they will start to shoot into the northern flank of this attack. So remember, when we think about this, this attack ain't going into a wall. I would argue it's going into the bottom of a box, and now it's being fired at from two sides. They will soon be joined, and we'll talk about this on a later walk, where we see the guy on top of the column. That's the Vermonters. They will wheel out from the south, and they're going to start to shoot in the southern flank of this. So now they're going to be shot at from three sides. You can imagine, so it's not just the artillery, but now they're feeling pressure on both of their flanks as they're trying to close on their objective that's directly in front of them. Anybody else want to add to that?
I just want to say, Doug, as we're getting closer up here to the Emmitsburg Road where we're all walking, this is when we're going to get the most infantry fire from the defensive line that's up along Cemetery Ridge. Most of this, now that we've walked, it's going to be the artillery fire. The troops are going to be against artillery, and the artillery are taking out some large swaths of people as we're moving forward. These lines are getting shorter, shorter, and shorter as they're moving forward because of these artillery casualties. There are skirmishers out in front. They're going to get some bullet fire, but when we get up here on the Emmitsburg Road, this is where the Union Army is going to unleash this defense. And the way that the Emmitsburg Road goes, everybody, as it heads north, is it gets closer to that Union line along Cemetery Ridge. So when you're on the far left of this, you're a lot closer to the Union line than you are if you're over here in front of where the angle and copse of trees are that Chris is pointing the camera at right now.
And we're approaching, thanks Wayne, one of the most famous views of the Civil War here. But let me just say, pick up on something Wayne said. Wayne said these lines are getting shorter. For those of you who don't know, they are literally getting less wide. As a group of soldiers gets taken out, you close up to one side or the other. And to that extent, the lines literally shrink laterally as they approach the Emmitsburg Road. And I would say that, first of all, this road was different at the time of the battle. Gettysburg does have a sunken road, and this is one of them. Long Lane is a sunken road as well. And when you reach the comfort of a sunken road, looking at what Chris is showing you here, right across the way, sort of a little citadel in front of you, crowned by artillery, bristling muskets and bayonets, you know, it might have been very comfortable to stay in this road, right, Wayne?
Absolutely. And, you know, Gary, we can say that for certain. The question everybody has is, did people get out of this road? And I want to talk about this for a few minutes because I get tired of, of hearing it. The Confederate soldiers come in and use this road for cover. Of course they do. This road was sunken during the time of the battle. It doesn't look like it does right now. So it is a natural avenue to cover. There's recent scholarship. People want to say, well, the majority of the Confederates didn't get out of this road and they didn't end up going forward here. And there are numerous pieces of evidence, I think, that will refute that. First of all, let's take a look at the Elliott burial map. The Elliott burial map has hundreds of graves, 522 of them right here, then another 106, and then more. The bodies that were buried here after Pickett's charge were buried on the west side of the road. I don't know any burial detail in the whole world that takes a body from the, or on the east side of the road, excuse me. I don't know a burial detail in the whole world that takes a body from the west side of the road, drags it across the road, and decides they're going to bury it right here. I think the majority of the Confederates that are killed or wounded in this assault are killed or wounded here east of the Emmitsburg Road, which is the side we're standing on right now from bullet fire. Look at the wounds. We can see what they are. It doesn't mean, folks, that some people did not leave the battlefield. It doesn't mean that some people didn't stay in the road, because they did, and we know they did. The question is it the majority? Is it most of the Confederates? And I just don't see it. I don't know how the other folks here feel about it. Chris, I don't know how you feel about it, but I just read this all the time, and I get tired of looking at it because I just think the evidence doesn't support it.
No, I agree with Wayne wholeheartedly. I mean, we have a Confederate, 3 Confederate divisions hitting a fixed fortified position. If you don't think this is a prepared position, you're crazy. Yes, there is a stone wall there, an existing stone wall, but portions of the line we'll walk in our next video were fortified. Some of the Union soldiers would say they were no higher than a molehill, but it is going to give them cover, concealment. It's a prepared position. Alexander Hayes, fighting Alec Hayes in command of a division in the Union 2nd Army Corps, has told all of his men to find those discarded muskets that are around you. They might have 1 musket, 2 muskets, 8 muskets loaded and laying right along that stone wall, waiting for these Confederates. And then, of course, what Doug talked about on our last video, and check that out, is Henry Hunt's artillery. He is going to slacken his artillery fire, which is going to lure in the Confederates to make this attack. And as they get closer and closer, he will then switch over to a short-range canister, which are iron golf ball-sized pieces of iron coming out of these guns, out of a coffee canister. So now we've gone from a bombardment to a barrage, setting up a wall of lead and iron that is coming across here. There's absolutely no doubt that Confederates stopped in this road, used it for cover and concealment, but there are men, and we know this, we have all the first-hand documents, who got up and moved forward. How many of those? That is to be debated, and we're going to check that out a little bit more later in this video and another video. But this is, sometimes some people might call it bravery, some people might call it stupidity to go into this. But what this is war. And war is the dumbest thing that humans can do to one another. But out here on the fields of Pickett's charge, this is going to bring everything together. Whenever we talk about the human drama, we see the mechanical with the artillery, and then we're going to see it all play out here on the fields of Pickett's charge. And that's why we come back here every year.
it becomes a really interesting point when we think about it, just even statistically speaking, as Chris and Wayne were talking about. Artillery will count for anywhere between 10 and 15% of casualties on Civil War battlefields. So it makes sense that they keep going, because based on the number of casualties, most of them would be by rifle fire. And today we would refer to the Emmetsburg Road as an informal fire support coordination measure, because if you're trying to command and control the 6,000 Union infantrymen that are there, everybody can see the Emmetsburg Road, and when we get there, that's when we're going to open fire. That's when we're going to transition to canister. Sarah brought up June Kimball earlier. June Kimball with the 14th Tennessee, as he crosses the road, will meet Theo Hartman, who will tap him on the shoulder and say, "I'm with you." And he says they make a compact that they will continue together. Soon they'll be joined by a guy named William McCullough, who says, "I'm with you also." He only goes 10 steps further before he gets shot in the head. But nonetheless, they would be advancing across these fields. And you can imagine, you know, for all the high ground there is here in Gettysburg, as you look at the field in front of us, this does not seem all that steep. But to the advancing Confederates, it must have seemed like a mountain. And Union soldiers will talk about Confederates advancing hunched over with their hats pulled low, as if they were advancing into a storm. And of course it was. It was a storm of shot and shell.
Good, good. Wayne, you're with the American Battlefield Trust. Let's give a little pause here. We don't want to get to the end too quick, and we are resisting the urge to get too much into the Union response to all this. We're talking about it, but we're going to cover that on another video, as Chris referenced, after this. Now, a few people I want to mention here. Really happy to have Mike Lentz on here. He was one of our finalists in the Gettys Nerd quiz we held at the Adams County Historical Society a few days back. Look for that video in a few weeks as well. Aaron Rowland is on. Really happy to have you here as well. So look for another video coming up soon. Now, this is one thing I wanted to just pause before we get into this final moment. You know, Wayne mentioned the Elliott burial map. We have a map, sometimes very precise, sometimes less precise, but we know that this field was absolutely covered with dead. We know that field was as well. We've been walking over what were or are graves. When you're on battlefields, you know, battlefields are cemeteries. They were, and in many cases they still are. We expect that there are hundreds of remains still on this battlefield, and I think the government now believes, you know, what better place for them at this point. But, you know, it causes sort of a mix of reverence, you know, and, you know, as you see sometimes irreverence, because we're telling a story that, even if obscene and terrible, is, you know, thrilling in a lot of ways as well. So I just want to encourage people, when you come to battlefields, not everybody engages in the same manner, and I want to encourage y'all to mix that reverence and whatever other feelings you have when you come, because battlefields are different than other places. I think Chris wants to say something too.
Soldiers from Caesar's legions all the way up to our War on Terror, they have a dark sense of humor as well to get them through everything that happens out here. And we'll talk about some stories along the Union lines, including a man who uses a coffee pot as a weapon. So you're going to see a lot of different things out here, and this is a coping mechanism for many of them. But Doug was bringing us up into what is termed as a three-sided box out here to the north behind us. And if you look behind, you might be able to see the Eisenhower tree. That wasn't here in the 1860s, but placed here in the 1950s. And there's a monument or marker to the old Camp Colt training ground. But what's important is you can't see the stump of that tree, and you can't actually see up and over to Pickett's Buffet, which was purchased by the members of the American Battlefield Trust. Ooh. That's where the 8th Ohio that Doug talked about coming up and swinging in and firing in this direction is firing from, but we can't see them. So how do we get support there? We have them from the east. That is going to be the main Union line, or the Union 2nd Army Corps, with reinforcements coming in. And then, of course, 1st Corps reinforcements swinging up in the form of 3 of the 5 brigades of the Vermont Regiment, the 2nd Vermont Brigade, I should say, swinging up here. They're sealing off either one of the flanks. And as we talked about, the Confederate line will be very extended when they start, but then keep compressing as they dress, they dress, they dress. That'll be through men who are falling back. Some of them are wounded. Some of them don't want to make this charge. Others will make it to the Emmetsburg Road and not push any farther. So as this line comes across, it's going to keep getting smaller and smaller. Think of a long rectangle, just slowly, like a Tetris piece, moving across here and just shrinking and shrinking, eventually entering inside of this box. And unfortunately for them, when they make contact here, it's that three-sided box. It's a wall of fire coming in from all sides. But what makes it worse if you're a Confederate and you look back across those fields, as Doug was pointing out in our last video, no one else is coming. There's no artillery support coming across here. There's no close infantry support. This is what most of Lee's assaults during the war lacks, a follow-up. This is something that will be talked about by his high command. We just came up too short. We were either attacking too late in the day, or we had a division or a corps too few. And that is what's happening out here at Gettysburg. I don't want you to think about one item. When Lee comes here north, he has to extend his supply lines from Richmond all the way up to Harrisburg at one point and then contract that line. And as he does so, that means he has to leave units behind. That means he is leaving cards on the table. Pickett's division has 5 brigades in it, but only 3 here at Gettysburg. That is half a division left behind. Part of Early's division is left behind as they make their way up through here. And a very churlish general named Daniel Harvey Hill, who doesn't like Robert E. Lee all that much, won't lend as many troops that were lent by Lee back to the Army of Northern Virginia. The Confederates left something like 8,000 men on the table as they marched north. That is one full division here. And I'm not playing the what-if game, but think about if he had 8,000 more men in support, what he could have had here at Gettysburg. Would they have been played out on July 1st, 2nd, or 3rd? We don't know that, but we do know for a fact the Confederates left cards on the table in Virginia and what is today modern-day West Virginia.
Thanks, Chris. I got 3 things, one in response to that. The first thing is, one thing is that Lee tried to put strength in the middle, or at least Longstreet did. He didn't really put a lot of strength on the flanks. There was supposed to be. Armistead is behind Garnett and Kemper, and you have this power. But, a capable opponent is going to also shift troops while you are. This is why at many battlefields there isn't that follow-up punch, because your opponent is thinking the same thing and wanting reinforcements to the critical point. 2, I want to do a 360, then I have a question for Wayne. So, Sarah behind the camera, you're looking out toward the scene of Pickett's division's attack, and then we're going to cross by the Cadore buildings over there where General Pickett probably reached during the field of attack at Pickett's charge. You're seeing the Round Tops over there, and you're seeing some really varying terrain between here and the Round Tops. Then you're catching some of the Union monuments. We're going to cover those a little bit more when we get over there. And then you're seeing the famous clump of trees. This lone tree here is what we call the Angle. We'll talk about that area around there as well. And then this is the rest of Cemetery Ridge over here. So Chris already showed you some of this. Now, as we start to walk again, Wayne, I just want to pick up on something you said. So not everybody came past the sunken Emmitsburg Road, right? But when they did advance from there, were they in clumps? Were they in organized lines? What's your impression?
Yeah, and you took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to try to jump in. We're talking about organized lines as we head toward the Emmitsburg Road. These lines are getting shorter, and shorter from the casualties. But once the troops cross the Emmitsburg Road, the semblance of order really melts away, and it's very difficult for the Confederates to keep any sense of a combat line here because the troops are clumped together. Armistead is coming up behind as the Virginians. You've got Trimble's 2 brigades that are coming up behind. They started out behind, and Armistead started out behind. They're catching up, and now we've got troops that are leaving the battlefield, some of them wounded and otherwise, and the other troops coming up in front of that. So we've got to say, Gary, when they cross the road, what we're walking here, it's very difficult to keep a sense of order. And you want this to be a bayonet assault. These troops have fixed bayonets. You don't want them to stop and fire, because if they stop and fire, the Union Army is going to be taking out large clumps of men. You're going to take out the momentum of this assault. This is supposed to be a bayonet assault, so you want to get everybody to move forward, but your natural inclination, if you don't have a commanding officer over here, is to stop and open fire. And that's what some of these troops are doing, stopping part of this momentum. Some of these soldiers, we should say, also are mounted. Richard Garnett is mounted. Pettigrew was mounted and wounded. Trimble is mounted and wounded. Lee had given orders the men weren't to mount, but they know getting off the horse, they really can't command because their ability to move around is very limited. You get off that horse, you're only commanding what's immediately in front of you, but then what a huge risk you're going to take being mounted. And many of these commanders here pay a heavy price for being mounted here in the assault.
Indeed, Wayne, and let me just say, and thanks for that, here we have 5 people that have a lot to say about Pickett's charge, and note that we have been walking this field on the Confederate line, Union line, and in between for a solid 6 years, or 7 maybe, live and not live during this anniversary. We encourage you to go back and see our other anniversary coverage. We encourage you to watch our War Department videos, because we can't possibly cover the thousands of Confederate soldiers who moved beyond the road. We can't possibly cover the hundreds of stories we have about these soldiers, and this doesn't even include all of the Union stuff that we are working on at this point. So we really want to encourage you to now. I want to talk to Doug here and see what he he has to say, because here we are approaching sort of the William Faulkner moment here, right? For every Southern boy, there's still hope right here. So we're not gonna enter the Union line here. We're gonna end up here near the angle. But what is this moment like for you, Doug?
Yeah, so I thought the idea of the disintegration, right? Most of war is about cohesion and disintegration. The disintegration of these Confederate lines as they come across. And remember, we call it Pickett's Charge or Longstreet's Assault, but remember, nobody charges across the field. They march across the field. You couldn't have them run. First guy would get here in 15 minutes. The last guy, you know, the guy you call when you're moving your refrigerator, he wouldn't get there for another 30. We got these guys, they all show up at the same time with one concerted fist to break through this line. So as Wayne was talking about, anywhere from about 100 yards down to about 50 yards, many of these Confederates will level their rifles and deliver a volley, and then for the first time you'd hear it, the rebel yell. Now it's Pickett's charge. Now men will start at a rush to slam into this Union line. Now it is truly the culmination of all of the artillery fire, this movement, the coordination of Pickett and Trimble and Pettigrew to get to this point to now have this concerted fish will now slam into the Union line.
Well, who wants to claim the mic? Here we are coming up to our goal here to bring this up. We don't want to talk about what's going to happen when they cross the wall, but I don't know. I guess I'd be curious about numbers here. I mean, we've got all of Pettigrew and any of Trimble's guys that are going to make it this far here on the left. I place, only, I don't place 2,000 or 3,000 actually coming right up to this wall. What are your impressions here? What kind of a punch does the Confederate attack have at this point?
So this becomes a really great question, and it's one we can't ever know. Wayne was talking about the burial maps. So even if we say, hey, they knock out 20%, if we say roughly 12,500, that's usually 8,000 come across the road. So we think 8,000 cross the road and then the infantry open fire. I don't know. How many guys do they actually shoot down? If you go 15% of all the guys in the infantry line are the real killers of that 8,000, that means more than 5,000 guys get up here. And if you think about that, there's 6,000 here, but they've been under the artillery bombardment. They've been getting pounded for the last hour. All of those guys, I put the number as higher. I think that more people arrive here, and oh, by the way, the battle flags tell us that's true too, because guys are going to follow their battle flags. And this is both the brilliance and the tragedy of how they did recruiting back then. We would all been recruited from the same small town, and once one of us decides to go, we all have to go, because if you don't, you can never go back home. And as long as that guy from your town goes forward, you're going forward too. And this is why the losses are so tragic. And the other thing we could say is after 2 years of war, now all the narrow-shouldered people are gone. They all know in both armies, how do you win? Stay another minute, advance another 2 minutes, stay after it another 5. And because they do, the casualties on this battlefield are through the roof. So I have it as more, but that's open to debate.
I think you're right. There's a reason why you bring him out here, Gary. You couldn't have said it better. I don't think. I think he's right. I think you've got 8,000 or 9,000 get to the road. That's my thought. Think about what's taken out in the cannonade. You've got some people that are down because of the heat. And folks, we're walking the battlefield when there's a great breeze out here on July 3rd, 161 years ago. It didn't look like that. One of our colleagues is working on the weather. So we know at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on the 3rd, it was some 87 degrees. And then the field temperature is over 100. And we're out here in short sleeves and everything else. And we know the troops were lost also because they were down with the heat. But I think the majority of them got out of that road. I think they got up into the field, and then they got driven back to the road for cover if they were not killed or wounded. That's my opinion. And then you've got some crossing the wall here, and you've got breakthroughs at 2 other points south of where we're at too as well. Let's remember that. North of us, you've got troops coming right up to where the Union line is located, but you don't really have a breakthrough. And one last thing I want to say too, Gary, and maybe we can talk a little bit more about it at some other time, but we ought to do a whole video on it, in my opinion, is the combat stress, the combat trauma, the mental anguish of these troops that are here. I can't stress to all the viewers enough what Pickett's charge does to these troops mentally. Forget about whether they're physically injured. We know that PTSD happened. Some troops could not come back and walk this attack because of what they saw, the trauma witness. And this is just one battlefield. That's all a cumulative trauma. And we can't put into words what Pickett's charge did to the people that survived it. And whether or not they had a physical wound or not, everyone is coming out of here with a mental scar. And back in those days, they don't have the mental health professionals we have today. The military has special people dedicated to deal with this type of military trauma, and I can't stress to the viewers enough, in my opinion, it's a tremendous amount of mental anguish and trauma from this assault here and in other places on Civil War battlefields.
Thanks, Wayne. I think we're going to leave it there unless anybody else is calling up for it. So we have brought the Confederates in 2 videos across the field. By the way, we've been shooting videos for the last few days here. We've been launching them at other times as well. We got a really special one coming up of a famous photograph on July 2nd. So make sure you're checking out our other coverage and catching up. But we've brought the Confederates up here. We're going to do our best to have another video before too long on the Union line and really bring Pickett's charge to a close here. I can't thank Wayne Motz enough. You know, he works with the Gettysburg Foundation, and this is a busy week for the Gettysburg Foundation. That he's spending time with us is just great. We appreciate it. Doug Dowd's licensed battlefield guide and a million other things joining us with their time. And let me tell you, I get a lot of undue credit for these videos that Chris and Sarah and other people are doing a whole lot more. Andy behind the scenes, making things run, deleting the bots and everything like that. So I can't thank everybody involved enough, and you for watching, for supporting battlefield education and preservation, for sharing this with your friends, and for most importantly, helping to perpetuate the story of our great country.